What's up, guys? Welcome back to Let's Talk. I'm John, and today we're going to be talking about all things 1970s movies. Hopefully, you guys are all here. If you're not, you can check it out on the rewatch. I appreciate you all being here. Thank you so much. And I decided today that we were going to talk about 1970s movies because you guys all know my favorite decade for films is the 1980s. That is a big shift from the 1970s. It's almost like an overcorrection that we kind of fixed in the 1990s. In the 1970s, we were mostly doing a lot of character studies. We were coming off the Hays Code. So, in the 1960s, movies kind of they just weren't as dark. We started to get there towards the end of the 1960s as they started to pull back the reins the studios because the Hays Code was a self-inflicted thing where in fact the studios decided that they want to, we couldn't even show like toilets flushing, kissing was kind of a big deal. So in the 1970s, we kind of started to shift away and things got more darker, more real. And a lot of people's favorite decade for films is 1970s, and it's probably my second or third favorite. I can't decide if 70s and 90s is behind 1980s. Let's see who's here. What's up, Kevin? I'm glad to see you here. Kevin L's here. John Joe Juggalo's here. What's up, buddy? Let's do this, fellas. Good afternoon. Been looking forward to this all week. I'm glad you guys can make this here. I'm going to try and make this a Saturday thing. I got the house to myself until my wife gets out of work. So that's usually why I have a hard out at like 3:30, 4 o'clock because I got to go pick her up. But after I'm done editing Let's Talk for tomorrow, I always like to come on here and talk to you guys. And I'm having a lot of fun with these live streams. I love doing them. So Rico Gomez is here. He also wrote 70s is more mature movies. It's Hollywood starts to make movies with foul language and sex. 80s is a decade for teen movies. Well, I did. What's up? Tell him Freddie sent you. I'm glad to see that you're here too. I agree with that, Rico. That's definitely what happened. I mean, I'm an 80s movie guy. I grew up with 80s movies, and those are my personal favorite decade for movies. But I also love 70s movies almost as much. 80s, like, yeah, there's a lot of teen movies, a lot of slashers grew in the 80s. But in the 1970s, yeah, we had those character studies. I think that's really what it is a much darker era for film. We're coming out of the Vietnam War here in America. That was a big deal. That's kind of what the country was dealing with. And it just everything got more real, I think is the best way. Everything kind of was filming with a more like documentary style kind of look to the movies. We weren't filming on sound stages, or we weren't using them as a crutch like we were before that. Bonnie and Clyde in the 1960s, I think, is the real start of what we got with 1970s movies. I think Robert Towne actually wrote that, who also wrote Chinatown. And I think that's a great one. Kevin L said, what is your 5 favorite comedies from the 70s? Ooh, that's a tough one because I'm not a big 70s comedy guy. So it's going to be a little bit hard for me to pick comedies because I don't like Animal House. I think I've told you guys that. So as far as 70s comedies, I mean, Airplane's 1980. I don't even know if I have a favorite 70s comedy. I'm going to have to actually get a list of my to really dive into that. What is a good 70s? I don't think my comedy nature even started to go until the 1980s. Although is Caddyshack? No, Caddyshack's 1982. I was gonna say most of the stuff like kind of Blues Brothers also 1980. So it's really hard for me, Kevin, to pick like my favorite 70s comedies. Superman, I guess, is a comedy, but my sense of humor really doesn't start to take off until the 1980s. Uh, Tell him Freddie sent you. Taxi Driver is my favorite 70s film. Godfather 1 and 2 are my all-time favorite. Robster said that. Kevin L said creepiest 70s film. It's got to be The Exorcist. That is probably my favorite. As far as Taxi Driver goes, I have that. I brought some out. I brought some 4Ks out here to show you guys because I'm always talking about them, but I never actually show you guys. This came in the Columbia Classic set, so I do have Taxi Driver on 4K. Pretty nice 4K, actually. Beautiful 4K. As far as the quality goes, Taxi Driver is a very, very dark film. That is still one of the darkest films ever. That describes what 70s films were, is Taxi Driver. We're diving into the mind of Travis Bickle, a former Vietnam vet, and he's just trying to acclimate himself to everyday life, and he has a hard time doing it. He doesn't know how to do it. He's just trying. He has a hard time sleeping. That's why he wants to take the night shift. And he thinks he's doing the right thing. He's doing the best he can, but his mind is just so warped, and he doesn't understand exactly how everyday people live their lives. And a lot of these people who were trying to give him advice didn't go to war, didn't see the things that he saw. And I think that's a lot of stuff that happens in 1970s films. Let's head over to the creepiest 70s film, other than The Exorcist. The 70s were a rise of horror films. I guess Rosemary's Baby is in the 1960s, but we did start to get like Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Those exploitation horror films really started to come around in 1970. And I think that's what 1970s horror really illustrated was that. Again, everything felt more realistic in the 1970s. Everything felt more gritty and dirty. All of our films just started to shift that way. John Doe Juggler, if you have to share one 1970s film with somebody, what would it be? Oh, I'm going to go right to the top. I'll give you guys my favorite 1970s film, and that's Chinatown. I think Chinatown is an absolute masterpiece in the noir genre. I mean, John Huston, the father of noir, is in this movie, and it's a really funny story, actually. John Huston's in it, and at the time, Jack Nicholson had just started dating Angelica Houston, his daughter, and in the movie, what John Huston's daughter is seeing Jack Nicholson's character, so it's a little bit of like a play on reality. I mean, obviously, he's not banging his daughter like he is in Chinatown, thank God. But John Huston is in that movie, The Father of Noir. That movie is beautifully shot. Roman Polanski, the director, is persona non grata, and rightfully so. But that movie is probably the one I would recommend most if you haven't seen Chinatown. Who would have thought they would take a movie about water and turn it into one of the greatest films ever? So if I had to recommend one movie from the 1970s, that would be it, even over Godfather 1 and 2. And I love those movies. Think of the top three horror movies of the 70s. You have The Exorcist, Jaws, and Alien. Top three horror movies of the 80s is what? Well, yes, the 80s is definitely a shift. Okay. Like, yes, I mean, Jaws is an Alien are definitely horror movies, but Alien is a little bit more of a horror. It's more than horror to me. Jaws is definitely an action horror film, in my opinion, but Alien is a lot more to say about things than just horror. It's also about working. Alien. That's about a bunch of guys doing their job, men and women just doing their job. Think about in the very beginning when Yaphet Kotto and what's his name, they're talking about their share. And, like it's also a commentary on just a bunch of other stuff. So yeah, but once we get to the 80s, yeah, we did shift in the whole the slasher genre, which I'm a big fan of the slasher genre. It's not my favorite type of horror, but once we shift into that, things do change. Things become more mainstream, more of a pop culture thing. That's the thing that happens when we get to Freddy Krueger. His first movie was a straightforward horror movie, and then but that's Wes Craven also. Last House on the Left, 1970s, which is probably one of, and still holds up to this day as one of the most brutal horror films ever. Even the '09 remake is pretty damn decent. But yeah, I see what you're saying about the best horror movies from the '80s not translating as well to in comparison. But we kind of pulled back, and then once we get to the 1990s, you could say that horror commenting on 1980s horror definitely makes it a little bit more watchable when you go back, understanding it. Telling Freddie, say, I need Taxi Driver 4K. Looks gorgeous. You know what's funny, Freddie, is I still cannot believe that hasn't been released individually on 4K. That's probably one of Martin Scorsese's top 5 films all time, maybe top 3 most popular. I mean, it's not as popular as like Goodfellas, or even, I mean, it's probably more popular than Raging Bull, right? Like it's up there in his most well-known movies. Maybe not today, because I know people love Wolf of Wall Street. So, that's probably as people get older, Wolf of Wall Street will probably rise up with the younger audience, because I mean, he made Streets in the 1970s too with Harvey Keitel and Robert De Niro. So Martin Scorsese is just one of the best. Tell Freddie, Most Wanted 4K from the 70s. That's from Kevin L. I want Chinatown on 4K. I don't know why it hasn't come out on 4K yet. I mean, that's a beautiful movie, one of the most beautifully shot movies. There's so many shots in that movie from the magic hour when either the sun is coming up or coming down. I think that would translate beautifully to 4K. Plus, it's an homage to like 1950s noir films, but shot in color. That's when we kind of got the rise of neo noir. So I would love that movie on 4K. We've actually been fortunate enough to get, as you guys could see, a bunch of movies on 4K. Like I would have said Shaft a long time ago, and that came to 4K. So a lot of those blaxploitation movies I would love on 4K, like Dolomite and stuff. Especially since I think people probably know more about Dolomite now after the Eddie Murphy Dolomite Is My Name film that came out a few years ago. I think people would have more of an interest of seeing that. Once we got the Texas Chainsaw Massacre on 4K, I think, now we're getting a bunch of the horror movies coming to 4K, but I still really want Chinatown on 4K. If we can get that at some point, it's one of the most famous movies ever, so I'm hoping it eventually happens. So obviously it's a major studio release that we'll get. That will probably never come to a boutique label, but out of all the movies from the 1970s, that's probably the one I want the most. Dog Day Afternoon. That's one I want on 4K, and there is a rumor that that is coming to 4K this year. Let's all keep our fingers crossed on that because that's one of the best of the 1970s. Sidney Lumet directed that, and that's a movie that's a very ahead of its time. Like the only reason that um, Al Pacino was doing this is for his lover, and then you get John Cazale in there. John Cazale is one of the best actors from the 1970s. You had him in the two Godfather movies. You had him in The Conversation. You had him in Dog Day Afternoon, and then he's also in The Deer Hunter, which is another fantastic movies from the 1970s that I don't have the 4K for yet. I'm a little upset about that, but that movie is brutal. And if you think Christopher Walken only can do comedy, go watch The Deer Hunter. The man is phenomenal. What actor owned the 1970s? Ooh. Is it Jack? Is it Jack? It's got to be Jack Nicholson, right? Because between The Last Detail, Chinatown, One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, I mean, the guy was firing at all cylinders. And then just out of the 1970s, we get to The Shining. And that's because, Jack Nicholson, he was around in the 1960s, but people really didn't know about him until we got to Easy Rider. Like he's in a few movies, but you don't get Jack. You don't get the real Jack until you get to The Last Detail, then One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. And then, by the 1980s, Jack's almost a character of himself. The guy Jack Nicholson becomes more popular than the actor Jack Nicholson, but people knew the actor Jack Nicholson in the 1970s. So I think he probably owned a decade from an acting standpoint. I mean, as far as action goes, we also had the Death Wish movies. So, you know, there was just so many different types of genres, but they all kind of were more grounded in reality. I'm getting losing the chat here. I've never seen Chinatown. Got to find it now. John Doe Juggalo, I promise you, you will love that. The ending is one of the most shocking endings in film history, but yet they make fun of the ending of that movie. If you've ever seen the movie Inside Out, I'm not going to spoil it, but I'm just going to say the line for people who have seen it. Don't worry, Jack. Forget about it, Jack. It's Chinatown, and it's Cloud City. Forget about it, Jack. It's Cloud Town. So if you ever seen that, it's great. Did you like the Chinatown sequel to Jake's? I got to be honest, Rico. I wasn't a huge fan. I appreciated Jack Nicholson going back to the well and doing it. I mean, he directed it, I'm pretty sure, but it doesn't live up to the classicness of Chinatown. It's good. I think there's a 4K of that coming or is already come that I have to grab and revisit it because I haven't watched that since I've actually lived in this house. The last time I saw that Two Jakes was like 2015, and I remember thinking I was a little disappointed the last time, to be 100% honest. What else are we up to, Kevin? Most iconic performance of the 1970s. Wow. Sigourney Weaver and Alien. I think I'm gonna have to pick that because that wasn't even supposed to be her movie. We the first half of the movie we're like, is this Tom Skerritt's movie? Is he the leader of this? Is this gonna be him? And then as the movie progresses, and then she becomes the final girl, you know. Yes, we have Halloween where we really get to know what the final girl is, the start of the slashers with Jamie Lee Curtis as Laurie Strode. But then once we get a movie like Alien, nobody knew who Sigourney Weaver was. And then Alien turns her into the star, this action star that we really didn't have, like, as far as female action stars, especially. And she, that she carried that all the way through, then she could do movies like Ghostbusters or Working Girl. And Sigourney Weaver can just do it all. And her performance in Alien is incredible. Nobody knew her, and then she just came out of nowhere. But the best performance, it's Al Pacino in The Godfather Part 2. That character arc is just insane. From the way we start with him in the first one to how he ends up in the second one, he becomes just an unlikable person. In the first one, he's innocent, he's naive, he tries to see the good in the world. He ignores his family because he knows what they are, but then he gets wrapped back up into it, and then to become the man that he becomes. And that's all portrayed so well on screen by Al Pacino. This is all Al Pacino before the hoo-ha Al Pacino woo-ha. This is like before the overacting stuff, which I love. Don't get me wrong. I mean, his performance in Heat is amazing, but watch him in the first two Godfather movies and just tell me that's not one of the greatest actors you have ever seen. His arc from the first two movies is absolutely phenomenal as the leader of the family. What he does to Fredo can just never be undone. Telling Freddie says Hardcore is a good film in 1970, but a hard watch, but George C. Scott is great. Yes. Hardcore is a great movie from the 1970s. Paul Schrader directed that. Phenomenal film, very hard to watch. Paul Schrader also did a movie, I think it's the 1970s, correct me if I'm wrong, with Richard Pryor, Yaphet Kotto's in it, called Blue Collars also, which is another phenomenal film, and it's all like other Paul Schrader movies, so it does get very dark, but that one is talking about the working class union guys, the working in Detroit on I don't know if it's directly the Ford line, but definitely a car line. But Paul Schrader was making movies. He wrote Taxi Driver, but he still directs movies. He just had a movie come out a couple of weeks ago called Master Gardener that I heard is pretty fucked up, but I haven't seen it yet. I definitely have to check that out. But Hardcore is fantastic. Rigo Gomez also wrote. Come on, Burt Reynolds owned the 1970s. The box office says so. Clint Eastwood also runner up. I wasn't actually going with what I thought was I guess I wasn't going with money income, but Burt Reynolds, yeah, I mean he was Burt Reynolds. Between The Longest Yard, Smokey and the Bandit, yeah, women loved him. I'm sure. I don't know if they did those list rankings back then of the best looking guys, but I'm sure he would be number one as far as back then. I didn't. I got to look at a box office thing, but yeah, Jack Nicholson was probably taking home the awards. Burt Reynolds, I don't think he was. Nope, he was nominated for an Academy Award and he blew it because he talked shit about the movie Boogie Nights. He would have probably won for that, but he couldn't keep his mouth shut. But I love Burt Reynolds. The original Fuzz here, guys. Hi, John. How are you? I'd love to see Dog Day Afternoon on 4K. I'd also love to see China Syndrome on 4K, 1975. Great film, but fantastic performance from Jack Lemmon. I actually have not seen that. I have to check that one out. John Doe the Juggler wrote, "Hey Fuzz" to you, by the way. And Original Fuzz, guys, again, make sure you go check out his channel and subscribe to him. He does some fantastic work here on YouTube, and we really need to keep supporting YouTube creators like that. He does some awesome work, and I love your videos, man. I really do. I appreciate them. I try and run them as much as I can to make sure you get the views and make sure you get those likes because I'm really enjoying your work, man. And then right under that, Rico Gomez work. Pam Grier did a lot of action role where she fired guns and fought the 1970s. Pam Grier, she was the queen of black exploitation back in the 1970s. She didn't really pop around too much in the 1980s, and then she kind of came back around in the 1990s. It could be argued that Quentin Tarantino saved her career. Quentin Tarantino was doing that in a lot of the films in the 1990s, but Jackie Brown is where we really found out about Pam Grier, those acting chops. But yeah, she was an action star in the 1970s, a great one at that. What's it? Oh, Robster said, yeah, Pacino and Godfather 1 2 is incredible. Actually, don't like him at all in Heat. Yeah, I mean, if it's hard to go back, to watch the juxtapose between him in the 1970s and then in the 1990s. Once we get to Scent of a Woman, which is ironic because that's the one he won an Academy Award for, is we're just getting overacting Pacino. He just pretty much stopped doing the he never really settles into a role anymore. He's just yelling. I mean, a little bit, I guess. He still sometimes might whip out the old chops, but he doesn't do it as much. Not like he used to. 1970s Pacino, Dog Day Afternoon. He's calmer. He's a little more reserved. He's kind of more plotting. And then although in his performance in Heat, he has said that he was doing that because his character is supposed to be on cocaine. They never say it directly. I think they say it in the book, though. Caster Daniel Garcia says Chris Sanderand was in Dog Day Afternoon. Oh, wow. I actually did not even realize. And he also says Burnt Offerings in the 1970s were great horror until The Exorcist blew the competition away. Yeah, that's where things made the turn, is once we got to The Exorcist. Horror was just never the same. It's like Star Wars, which is 1977, changing for changing the sci-fi genre. He also had Tourist Trap is a horror flick ahead of its time. I agree. I have only seen that once, though. And Original Fuzz, thanks for the shout out, John. You're too kind. Really appreciate it. Hey, man, listen, it's my pleasure. You've been supporting this channel, and then you start your own channel, and it's a phenomenal channel. I love the work. Dirty Harry needs a 4K. I cannot believe we haven't gotten a Dirty Harry 4K set yet. I mean, Jim Carrey got a start in Deadpool, one of the Dirty Harry movies. And I mean, it's one of the most famous 1970s flicks. Clint Eastwood, again, that he would be not to, Clint Eastwood was firing on all cylinders in the 1970s too. Like Rico said, that's a big decade for him. Maybe not as big as the 1960s was, or even when we get to the 1990s, but the 1970s had some of his most famous roles. He was still making Westerns. He started doing his directing in the 1970s, and he's still directing at 94 years old. So I heard, though, that they took his office away from him at Warner Brothers, probably because they didn't expect him to still be alive, which is crazy because he was thinking about retiring in 1992 with Unforgiven. That was supposed to be the end, but he backed down. Star Wars in the 70s was thrilling. Yeah, I have a few other ones. I have some Tarkovsky sci-fi films in here. If everyone remembers, I mean, I wasn't alive in the 1970s, but if you watch sci-fi movies before 1977 Star Wars, you're going to see a very different sci-fi film. You're going to see a film that's slow and plotting, and it's going to take a while to get going. And then the ending is usually dark and bleak. And then when we get to Star Wars, it becomes more of a combination of adventure with sci-fi. And that's kind of what they shifted towards. And we didn't get as many of those dark and bleak sci-fi movies anymore after that. They still come out, but that's what sci-fi was before Star Wars. So there's sci-fi before Star Wars and sci-fi after Star Wars. And that all changed in 1977. Um, Let's see. Hopefully, I don't lose this chat. Young Frankenstein is one of my favorite comedies from the 1970s. I should have brought up Mel Brooks, because I always forget that. Yeah, he had some classics. He had Young Frankenstein and Blazing Saddles come out in the same year. I actually prefer Young Frankenstein. I think Young Frankenstein is actually my favorite Mel Brooks movie. I think that movie is hysterical. And just getting Gene Hackman for that one little role as the blind guy who's spilling everything on him is so great. That movie is really funny. Blazing Saddles is really funny too. Breaking the Fourth Wall always gets me. That's one of the most famous comedies ever. The Warriors, I hope, gets a 4K. I am hoping that The Warriors gets a 4K. That's another one that I don't understand how hasn't come to 4K. Another one. I mean, we got a video game from The Warriors. We need the 4K. Are you a fan of Monty Python and the Holy Grail? Yeah, I like Monty Python stuff. It's not my favorite. You know, it's that British dry sense of humor. I can watch it every once in a while. All their stuff that they did is pretty good. I actually do prefer Terry Gilliam though on his own when he started directing movies. I like his filmography. That weird stuff that he goes for really does work for me, like in Brazil and 12 Monkeys. The Fisher King, I think, is a fantastic movie. So I like him more as a director. His sense of humor, John Cleese is in there too. I do like it. The Pink Panther, is that 1960s or 1970s? Those movies are great also. The Frisco Kid with Gene Wilder and Harrison Ford is good. Yes, that is. And Gene Wilder, okay, 1970s. We got to talk about Gene Wilder, Wizard of Oz. I don't think him and Richard Pryor got going until the 1980s in their comedies with Stir Crazy, but that was, I think, the first one. But I'm a big fan of those two when they team up. But Gene Wilder was around in the 1970s. He's in Blazing Saddles, Young Frankenstein. Gene Wilder is probably one of the greatest comedic actors we ever had. Oh, Lee Marvin was a good action. Yes, I forgot about Lee Marvin. Lee Marvin, I think that might have been one of my dad's favorite. Oh, yeah, we're Fuzz fans here. Yes, we are, John Doe Juggalo. We love the original Fuzz. Rico Gomez says, I believe a Dirty Harry set is being worked on because the Blu-ray set is dirt cheap now, and that's a sign. Yep. Rico Gomez does keep track of all like the sales and stuff. He usually sends me all the sales, and then he has a tip for any of the collectors. Usually, if you see a big drop in like an older Blu-ray box set, or even just a Blu-ray, you'll notice that eventually they're going to announce a 4K set because they want to dump their stock and get ready for the new one, get rid of the old and bring in the new. So I've capitalized on that a few times with the Star Trek set. When they were going to really re-release that, I got that 4K set for pretty cheap. So if you do wait around, you will get that for a lot cheaper. Just make sure, keep your eye out. But you also have to be skeptical because you might get the 4K set. So it's really what you want. Best opening scene from a 70s movie. Well, I know it's not Chinatown. I don't think that's a great, it's not my favorite movie, but Jaws. I mean, that sets the stage for the entire film, that opening, and it looks beautiful. They shot it on location in Martha's Vineyard, which, is incredible. Even if Jaws isn't my favorite, that's still one of the greatest 1970s movies. And the opening to that movie, it's horrific. I mean, if you're scared of sharks, I can see why. Halloween 1 had a great opening. Yes, it does. And so the Rocky films are amazing. I got those. Rocky, what did we have? We had Rocky 1. And did Rocky 2 come? Yes, Rocky 1 and 2, I believe, came out in the 1970s. Rocky is one of the most famous, won the best picture in the 1970s. So that is, and it feels like a 1970s film. It's 100, that's, again, it's a character study of Rocky, of Sylvester Stallone's Rocky. And the way he put it all on the line for this movie, believed in himself, wouldn't sell the rights to the film unless he got to star in it, it's amazing. That's basically his life, a tale of, getting your shot and making the most of it. You can't argue with Rocky. Sexiest actors from the 70s. I'm a big Faye Dunaway guy. Faye Dunaway or Pam Grier probably are the ones I'd have to pick. Pam Grier was gorgeous. She still was once they got to the 1990s, man. Pam, she probably is now. I don't know what she looks like at 2023, but I'm sure she's still gorgeous. Paul Newman has a great filmography. Paul Newman was firing on all cylinders in the 1970s. I like 1960s. I mean, I'm not a big fan of The Sting. That was probably his biggest film in the 1970s, I would think, what he did with Robert Redford. But I like Paul Newman most when he starts to get older. Once we get like 80s Paul Newman and we get to The Verdict, I think, and then just there on, I loved it. I loved when Paul Newman settled into that older man kind of role. I mean, yes, we got to talk about Robert Redford too. He was another one of the big star, but he's another one I think that got bigger in the 1970s. Hold on a second. Sorry about that, guys. Favorite Disney movie from the 70s. Ooh, Disney. What was Disney doing in the 1970s? I don't even know if I own any 1970s films of Disney. Let's get a quick check so I can get the years right. Because I know it wasn't their animation. They were having a hard time until we got to the Disney Renaissance. Let's see if I can get anything that I actually enjoy from that. Oh, okay. Here we go. 1970 actually had the Aristocats. I would have said that was the 1980s. So the Aristocats is definitely my choice for the 1970s Disney movies. Let's see. Wow, George C. Scott was an intense actor. Love Phantasm One and the Toll Man. Toll Man is great. George C. Scott has. I've been watching a lot of George C. Scott movies lately, and he is one of my favorite actors ever. Now, I mean, the guy, he could really just do no wrong. He had, well, it's also his distinct voice, and then he just had some good comedy chops too. Like I mean, one of my favorite performances. It's a lot of people's favorite performances. Doctor Strangelove. I mean, he's great in that. This is this bumbling freaking general tripping over himself. Come on, and then I just love him in that. But then, yeah, in movies like Hardcore. But then even in the 1990s, like The Exorcist 3, that movie doesn't work without George C. Scott. So he is a great, phenomenal actor. John wrote, okay, so what will you say is the most underrated 70s movie? Underrated. Um, Underrated. You know, I just saw this week The Last Detail for the first time. Shamrock recommended that to me, and that movie I had never seen it before. And I'd always seen the cover with Jack Nicholson and the mustache and the cigar, and that movie deserves a lot of love. That movie, Robert Town wrote that. That's the one I think that made Jack Jack. And if you haven't seen The Last Detail, that movie is incredible. Um, couldn't get into Chinatown despite loving Nicholson and Noir. Hey, man, everyone has different tastes. I completely understand that. It's not a movie for everybody. I mean, the dark ending could be a little bit shocking, but I like movies like that. I also really love the score to Chinatown, but I absolutely respect that. I understand that not everybody loves Chinatown. Agreed about Pam Grier. Yeah, she's great. Most underrated action movie from the 70s. So we didn't talk about the French Connection yet, and I guess that's not underrated because the car chase scene is considered one of the greatest car chase scenes ever. So that's not an underrated. But Death Wish is probably a good one. I mean, I guess it gets talked about now. Like the 70s action is not 80s action. We get a little bit of action in the 1970s, but I think things didn't really get to go. We still have to cut around things. We still have a lot of jump cuts in the 1970s, like to cover, a lot of coverage was needed in the 1970s because, we're doing everything still practically. Yeah, we were in the 80s, but, the technology wasn't there. Like the 1970s Bond movies, that's when we get to see, there's a great stunt in one of them when they jump a car. You could tell it's real. It's actually cool. It's one of those Roger Moore Bond movies, but the Roger Moore Bond movies, that's when the action in the Bond franchise really did start to take off. 60s, but Newman and Hud was incredible. That is true. Yeah, that's when I think of Paul Newman, I do think of 1960s Paul Newman, or 1980s, or even some 1990s Paul Rudd. And then I'm not Paul Rudd, Paul Newman. I'm sorry, Paul Rudd. What am I saying? Although Paul Rudd is awesome. Paul Newman, yeah. Even Road to Perdition, like one of his last roles before he passed away. He's great in that. Paul Newman he's got the charm, man. I mean, that's the charm that we all want, isn't it? Superman 1 with Reeves and Gene Hackman is fantastic. Well, yeah, I just reviewed all those. You can see those right there, those 4Ks. And yeah, Gene Hackman, he's another one from the 1970s between the French Connection. Then he was in Superman. Gene Hackman, the Young Frankenstein. Gene Hackman is one of the greatest actors ever. I mean, I personally, my favorite role from him was in Unforgiven as Little Bill, but he does just phenomenal work whenever. I mean, even in the 1990s, he's in The Birdcage. I love him and Diane Weiss's performance. Look what you made me done. I've made your mother cry. He just is great. The original speaking of Faye Dunaway, whom I love, have you ever seen The Eyes of Laura Mars? Great film with an early Tommy Lee Jones performance. Actually, I have not seen that, but I have to see that Fuzz, the original Fuzz. I haven't checked that one out yet. Speaking of Tommy Lee Jones. I just bought the Cole. I bought it last year. I haven't seen it yet. Well, I've seen it, but I haven't seen it in a very long time. And it was $5. Coal Miner's Daughter. That was a good movie. That's a 1970s movie, I believe. It's kind of like the country's version of, why am I trying to blank? A Star is Born, almost in a way. That movie's really good as well. Kevin Allen, what movie of the 1970s would you like to go back in time and see the premiere of? Well, I think I. What would it be? One of the biggest premieres ever. I mean, it's probably either Jaws or Star Wars, just because the whole blockbuster effect of it, like being there. Like before Jaws, I think Jaws was the first one to ever do it. They rolled out movies, like they took them on the road, like they went city to city. You didn't have a nationwide rollout of it, and then once we get to Jaws, that's when like the blockbuster started. That's when things really started to pick up in the sense that we get everybody lining up. That's the blockbuster people things going around the block. So it'd probably be Star Wars because, like, yeah, it took what Jaws did and just took it to the next level. People could not get enough of Star Wars. I would love to see Star Wars without anybody else saying anything about it, going to day one night of, like, being one of the first people in the theaters to see this movie and knowing what sci-fi was. Could you imagine being like one of the first people to ever go see that? I'm sure people are out there. Ooh, Don't Look Now with Donald Sutherland is underrated. That is a great movie. I love Don't Look Now. Donald Sutherland is fantastic in that movie, and the ending to that movie is so creepy. With the girl, I'm not going to say anything more than that, but if you haven't seen that, Don't Look Now is fantastic. That's a great 70s horror movie. Donald Sutherland was in a lot of movies. Invasion of the Body Snatchers. He's in that. That's a 1970s horror movie, also a really good one. That's always on Amazon Prime if you guys want to check that one out. And he said, Kevin L said, favorite Gene Hackman performance from the 1970s. It's The French Connection. He's fantastic in that as one of the original anti-heroes. He plays this cop, but he's not the most likable person. I mean, I think Gene Hackman, that's kind of what Gene Hackman was always doing, though. He was always playing like these rough men, like they got an edge to them. They got a chip on their shoulder. Again, like with the 1970s character studies that we were getting, like, what is this man? What is pushing this man? Like, he stands for the law, but he's not afraid to get his hands dirty. There's some stuff in there that can make you uncomfortable watching it now, but you get the great car chase scene. But Gene Hackman in that movie was fantastic. He also did a noir. I'm drawing a blank on the name right now in the 1970s that I really liked. I can't remember what it was. Busting is a buddy cop movie from the 70s and is underrated. Stars Robert Blake. I haven't seen that. Robert Blake, who killed his wife. I have to check that one out, Rico. I haven't seen that one actually. It sounds good. Caster David Garcia says Phantom of the Paradise is underrated. Got to check that one out too. My mom watched Coal Miner's Daughter religiously when I was growing up. It's a fantastic movie, Coal Miner's Daughter. That's like a young Tommy Lee Jones before, because Tommy Lee Jones was just a struggling actor through like the 70s and 80s. I don't think people really started to know him until Under Siege, and then the next year with the same director they did why am I drawing a blank on one of my favorite, The Fugitive, where, obviously we get his Academy Award-winning performance as, the leader of the U.S. Marshals, which he would eventually reprise that role again. I love The Fugitive. Kevin, now best movie soundtrack from the 70s. I think the best score from the 1970s was definitely Chinatown. I'm going to be saying that a lot because I just think that movie is almost flawless. I get that not everyone loves that movie, but I have so many great loves for Chinatown. Dawn of the Dead, I would like to have seen the premiere. Wrote Costello, Daniel Garcia. I agree. That would actually been a good one. We didn't bring up Dawn of the Dead yet, but that expanded on. That's another great horror movie from the 1970s. George A. Romero, that expanded on his Night of the Living Dead. I think it's the best Dawn of the Dead movie. I don't think it's the best zombie movie. I think Return of the Living Dead is, but that movie with its effects is it's incredible. Maniac, I would have said too, but again, I think that's 1980. Like, it's weird how, have you guys ever always noticed that, like, the first couple of years of a decade, like, they kind of still feel like their previous decade. Like movies that came out in like 1980 and 1981, they still feel like 70s movies before same thing like with 1990. It still kind of feels like the 80s. Like, if you guys ever look, the song Cherry Pie by Warrant came out in like 91. That's a total 80s song, not a 90s song, but people don't think of it. Rico Gomez, what Jaws did was bring out families to the movies, with repeat viewings. Star Wars picked up the mantle, and that's why 80s movies turned toward teen movies. That's 100% true. That's really where movie studios, because think about it, The Godfather and The Godfather Part 2 were the highest grossing films of those years. They were the best picture winners. They are two of the best movies ever made. But we didn't start to get families going out to the theaters, or just even kids, teenagers, until we got to like probably Jaws and Star Wars. And then in the 1980s, movie studios saw the money they saw the money signs, and they said, hey, we got to start making more of these movies, four quadrant movies. We got to make movies that everybody wants to see. It's the rise of Steven Spielberg. Steven Spielberg was just making family films. He was producing family films, family adventure films. The Goonies, Poltergeist, Gremlins. These were all movies that had his name attached to it as a producer. Back to the Future, and I love all those movies. That's for me. That's my heart right there. But I know that not everybody does, and and I can see, if you're a fan of 1970s movies, seeing the shift, because now the movies that aren't getting the recognition, like movies like Gandhi from the 1980s, they might get the Academy Award, but people won't care about them as much. No, not everyone, they'll do bad at the box office. It's almost like what's happening today, actually, in the sense that now today's world, we get movies that are the movies that do good in the box office are MCU movies, not movies that took a lot of effort to make. I mean, not that MCU movies don't take a lot of effort to make, but they're just not dark anymore. And dark movies, that adult oriented movies, we get few and far between. And 1970s to the 1980s is where we saw that shift as well. Tell him Fraser, Eraserhead is an underrated David Lynch movie. I just watched Eraserhead not too long ago, and that movie, I've seen it like 3 or 4 times, and it still gets under your skin. That score, with all the banging and the metal sound in it, that's just a dark premise. I love David Lynch, though. That's not one of my favorite David Lynch movies. I think David Lynch's best films all came out in the 1990s, actually, with Lost Highway, Fire Walk with Me, the Twin Peaks movie, and Mulholland Drive is 2001, but I would rope that in there with them as well, David. But yeah, Eraserhead is fantastic. Put him on the map. It was basically a movie that took him years to make. And David Lynch is one of the best directors, and he's somebody who was never going to tell you what his movie's about. You have to do all the work yourself. He's never going to tell you what he was thinking about when he was making those movies. 808 Physical. Hey, John, did you pick up Kino Lorber's Longest Yard 4K yet? I haven't picked it up yet, but I will be picking that up pretty soon. It's actually, I think, on sale right now on Amazon, and I'm on the fence if I should get it now or wait for their sale, which will be like $17. Rico, who's in this chat, he's the one who's giving me all those tips on Kino and their releases as far as sales go, because I do want to grab that. Most unforgettable movie from the 1970s. Oh man, the one that just sticks with you. It's got to be The Exorcist. That movie is brutal. I watch it every year. It's still, like, when I was a kid, I didn't take that movie seriously, but once you become an adult, that movie becomes one of the hardest movies to watch, one of the scariest. Apocalypse Now, that movie, again, that's a wonderful character study, and just understanding what those soldiers had to go through and the brutality and what weighed on their minds. Apocalypse Now is another one of those masterpieces that just even watch the documentary about how that movie was Heart of Darkness. Brutal stuff, what they had to go through. Favorite movie poster from the 1970s. It's going to be Jaws. Even if I'm not a huge fan of it, that movie poster is iconic. Another one would probably be Alien, because that's another one that they put all. Just anything where you don't put too much, like it doesn't have to be it doesn't have to be overwhelming. You don't have to overwhelm it. It just has to be simple. And there's the shark coming out of the water. It's iconic, with the girl swimming up. It's iconic. Alien, same thing. Iconic stuff. I'm actually going to do a video, I think, pretty soon. I was going to do it this week, of like my favorite movie posters all time, because I love movie posters. I think it's a lost art. I feel like nowadays people just make templates and then they adjust on their templates. They don't actually put the effort into the movie posters. Not like they used to, at least. 808 Physical Media says, do you use Steelbook plastic cover protection? I don't. I have a weird thing. Like I unwrap all my stuff and then I put it on my shelf. I'll come in here, I'll dust it off, kind of wipe it clean every once in a while, but I don't like to put covers on things. Actually, even you guys can see on my phone. Oh, look at that, an alarm. What's it called? You can see on my phone right there that I don't like to put screen protectors on it. It bothers me. It like almost annoys me. Any little scuff on that stuff, I'll peel it right off. I can't do it. It's something just in my mind. Do you think they will remake The Godfather? If they're out of their mind, they will. But I there's been so many movies that I've said they'll never remake, and they have. So I don't want to say no. I hope they don't. There's no reason to remake a masterpiece. I don't think you need to be doing that. Like I understand why they remade Scarface. Like I get it. It came out at a time in the 1930s or 40s when they didn't have the technology. It made sense to update it. But like do we like I hear rumors all the time that they're going to remake Back to the Future. Don't remake certain movies. Just leave them alone. Alien will probably get a remake. That makes a little bit more sense because they've ruined it with 7 sequels, like and only good sequels been Aliens. Like, there's some that are decent, but like nothing that lives up to the original Alien. So like I could see Alien getting a remake. I hope they don't touch The Godfather. I think enough people can agree that The Godfather 1 and 2 are some of the greatest films ever made. Anyway, it says, how many steelbooks in your collection? I actually don't have a count. That's a good question. I'll have to do a count of that one of these days. I just know my full number is like almost like 1,000 now, actually, as far as owning. But my steelbook collection's got to be over 200 or 300. I do get a lot of them. Do you think Elijah Wood has seen Hostel Part 2? That's Marvel fan 2022. I don't know because he probably wouldn't want to see that if I had to guess. I hope so, but you never know with these celebrities and what they have and have not seen. Kevin L said, I want to see the premiere of The Exorcist. Oh, so that's one of the most famous premieres in the sense that most people know that people were fainting and puking in the aisles and they couldn't handle it because back in the 1970s, compared to nowadays, like people are still religious now, but that back then it was a lot bigger. People could not handle seeing things like that. There was a lot just it was overwhelming to them. Like imagine being like a middle-aged housewife in the 1970s where going to church was your big day out on Sunday, and you go and see The Exorcist and you see a child getting possessed and like having to deal with that and just like not understanding what is going on, and maybe you believe that like something like that could happen. Like they played it out so real. William Freakin made a masterpiece with The Exorcist. Looking forward to that 4K too. What is your current favorite movie director? Wrote 808 Physical Media. Well, currently it's still Christopher Nolan as far as modern directors go. Scorsese and Spielberg still make movies, and they're still some of my favorite directors. Spike Lee's another one. He's in my top 5 all time, and he still makes movies. But you could argue that his movies aren't as good as like Do the Right Thing or Malcolm X, like what he was doing in the late 80s and even the 90s, and then with the 25th Hour. Like, but right now it's probably Nolan. Impressive Tony gave me a super chat. Thank you, buddy. I really appreciate that. Just stopping by to show the show some love. Let's get my dude to 2,000 subscribers. Have a great weekend. Thanks, Impressive Tony. That's another guy with a fantastic YouTube channel. He just hit over 1,000 not too long ago. Thanks for the $5, man. I really appreciate it. I mean, it means the world to me. Thank you so much. Go check out his review also for Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse. I watched that this morning. Great review. Great guy. Definitely subscribe to him as well. John, let's see, where was I on this chat? John Del Jublo. I'm gonna switch it up. What's your least favorite 70s movie? I've seen a lot of 70s movies that have bored me to tears, but my least favorite, we had The Exorcist, and then you have The Exorcist 2, the Herrick or Hurricane. I can't pronounce the word, and I'm gonna ruin it. But that movie is absolutely atrocious. I have no idea. I mean, I know what happened because you lost basically everybody who was a part of the creation process of the first Exorcist. You lost the writer and William Blatty and William Friedkin. I mean, you bring back some of the cast, but that movie will bore you to tears. If you want to go to sleep tonight, forget taking a melatonin or whatever you did, counting sheep. Go watch The Exorcist 2. I promise you will pass right out. Do you triple dip on your favorite movies? I do, actually. I have probably like 8 copies of Terminator 2. I have 3 copies of the Terminator. And Terminator 2, I own 2 copies of the 4K. And I won't even go and grab, I'm not even going to watch them. I watch the Skynet edition, although I do need to still watch the Blu-rays in there because I have been told numerous times by the original Fuzz and many other people that Blu-ray is actually better than the other previous release Skynet edition Blu-rays. But when it comes to my favorite movies, yeah, I usually don't hold back. Like the Film Vault is doing, like, I know people are huge fans of Jaws. I don't know if you guys have seen, they're re-releasing, like they're doing like these really nice special editions. They did it with Blade Runner, which I didn't get to grab, but I will when they get it again. So yeah, when it comes to my favorite films, I will absolutely triple dip. Back in the 70s, sometimes the movie poster looked better than the movie, like King Kong 1976, where you have Kong on the poster with each leg on the tower holding a jet. Rico, I actually love the 1976 King Kong, and I'll tell you why. So I give a lot of my love for movies to my mom. She loves movies. You know, she had me pretty young, and she always said that she didn't want to watch movies with her kids that she wouldn't like. So she showed me a lot of movies at a way too young of an age. So my mom was born in 1970, so she was showing me movies that she grew up with, and she loved the 1976 King Kong film. So I have seen that one more than any other King Kong movie, and I absolutely love it. I know it's not the greatest made. I know it's not the best one, but nostalgia is a crazy thing, and yes, that movie poster is awesome. I think I think movie posters were at their best in the 1970s and 1980s. You know, back before then, they kind of followed templates. You know, everything was kind of copying each other. Not as bad as what they do today. What they do today, sometimes you can actually line them up, and they are some of the worst. They're all the same. The Last Starfighter will eventually be rebooted. Oh, 100% that's getting rebooted. That there's no doubt about that one. 808 Physical Media, Martin Scorsese or Quentin Tarantino. 808, those are my 1, 2, and I go back and forth. The only reason, I mean, Quentin Tarantino, I just feel like, hey, he's never had a miss. Now, Martin Scorsese has way more movies. He has probably way more successful movies. I probably like more Martin Scorsese movies than Quentin Tarantino has ever made. But the problem is that also Martin Scorsese has made some movies that I don't love. Like, I don't think New York is a great movie. I haven't seen The Last Temptation of Christ in a very long time. You know, some movies that came out in the 1990s, like, you know, they're lesser than some of his great ones. You could argue that all of his movies are at least well made, and I agree with that. They pretty much are, but there's not as many as I love. I mean, there's probably 12 Martin Scorsese movies that I think are absolute masterpieces, but Tarantino, I think, has never missed. He's come close to missing, but he's never missed. I can watch any of his movies any day. So I give the edge to Tarantino. I mean, I give Pulp Fiction the movie that got me into loving movies, that made me start analyzing film. I was just blown away by what they did in Pulp Fiction. So Tarantino, but you know, Scorsese. Last week I watched Goodfellas, and I mean, that movie, I've seen that movie 100 times, and it's still great. So Arnold Schwarzenegger or Sylvester Stallone, 808 says, well, that's going to be Stallone. Not Stallone. That's going to be Schwarzenegger for me. I've said this before, and I'll say it again. As much as I love Sylvester Stallone, I've learned to love Sylvester Stallone. I do not think that he is as good as Arnold Schwarzenegger. Arnold Schwarzenegger, are they both great actors? In my opinion, Sylvester Stallone is probably the better actor. Like, when he wants to act, like, just go watch First Blood or the Rocky movies. When he wants to act, he's a better actor. Schwarzenegger, no one's going to ever say Arnold Schwarzenegger is a great actor, but I love the man. I love all his movies. I mean, there's very rarely do I walk out of an Arnold Schwarzenegger movie and, like, I'm disappointed. I know what I'm going into. I know that I'm there for the cheesy one-liners, the over-the-top action, or when he does comedy like Twins and Kindergarten Cop. I'm there for that, and I love every second of it. Uh, and then Marvel Fan 22. What you mean by Hostile? Well, has done horror movies and likes horror movies. What do you think Elijah Wood's reaction to Hostile 2 would be? Do you think Hostile 2 Part 2 is the best horror sequel? I haven't seen Hostile 2 in a long time. I know that Elijah Wood does make a lot of horror movies. I actually have an Elijah Wood documentary series behind me that he's done. He's also, I know he was a child actor and all that stuff. So Elijah Wood, I just actually haven't seen Hostel Part 2 in a while for me to give a definite answer. That's the only reason I can't answer that one, because I'd have to rewatch it. I know it's considered one of the greatest horror sequels ever. I watched Hostel and Hostel 2 back to back. I watched them with my cousin a long time ago, and I know she loves them. She still does. She still posts about those movies, actually. So I got to definitely. Are you going to pick up Best Buy John Wick 4K for Steelbook? So I actually haven't decided, and I haven't pre-ordered it. I think I'm going to get the Best Buy exclusive one. There's so many. That's probably one of the movies I have seen the most special editions of a film is with John Wick 4, which I get it. It's one of the most popular franchises at the time, and one of the most popular franchises going right now. Rigo Gomez wrote, the King Kong 1976 score is great. I have bought that CD twice. Very romantic, and your wife will love it. Maybe I'll listen to that score today. I've been listening to a lot of scores lately. You know, I kind of got in the mood with Hans Zimmer after watching Thelma and Louise. But yeah, I have a lot of love for the 1976 King Kong movie. I got to be honest. What's your Elijah Wood horror movie? Do you think do you think Finn Woodhard has seen Hot Fuzz? I hope he has. Finn Woodhard, Wolfhead. That's the guy from what's it called? Stranger Things, right? Finn. Yeah, Wolfhard. Is there a reason why you're asking why I would think he had seen Hot Fuzz? I don't know if he has. I mean, Hot Fuzz is fantastic. I think that's still one of the better movies from the 2000s as far as spoof movies go. That one never gets brought up in the conversation as great spoof movies, great satires of action movies. That one never gets brought up, and it really should. Maniac with Elijah Wood is great telling. Freddie said, yeah, I do like Maniac a lot, but I have the original 4K over here somewhere. Great 4K, by the way. That's a Blue Underground 4K. His remake is really good, but I really like the original more. He's also he remade another movie recently, Elijah Wood, actually, another a classic horror film that I haven't seen. I also got good reviews. He does put a lot of he's a big horror fan, so he does put a lot of effort into his movies. I can't disagree there. I have to see I'm trying to remember what that movie was. I don't know it off the top of my head, so we're gonna leave that here. Cooties without Elijah Wood is a zombie movie. I have seen Cooties actually. John Doe, John Doe Juggler. Speaking of scores, are you into collecting soundtracks on CD or vinyl? I used to be. I don't know if I've told you guys the story on here before. I was a big physical media collector when it came to CDs. I had started my collection back in, I want to say 1998, with a little album by Smash Mouth called Astra Lounge. And I had collected all that up until like 2013. And then somebody stole my entire CD collection out of my car, and I just never started over. At that point, we had already had iTunes, so I just started going digital, and now we have Apple Music, so I don't collect anymore. So, and most of the scores and soundtracks are available on Apple Music. Sometimes I do get a little disappointed where they'll block out certain songs on the soundtrack and they'll make you pay for them. But for the most part, you can get everything on there. I would love to go back to collecting vinyl. I've seen it. It looks, some of the vinyls they release are beautiful, but my wife will absolutely murder me if I start collecting something else. So I can't do that. Let's see what's up next. Okay, wow, I screwed that up, guys. Backed up and just Sidney Lumet or Stanley Kubrick. Oh man, that's a tough one. Sidney Lumet is somebody who was just firing on cylinders from the 1950s all the way through the 1980s. This guy just could not miss. Stanley Kubrick, though, is another one like Quentin Tarantino, where, you know, Sidney Lumet was putting out a lot more movies, where Stanley Kubrick would put out a movie and then you wouldn't see another movie from him until like the 19, I'm not 19. You wouldn't see another movie from him for like 3 or 4 years, sometimes even 5 years. Like, how many movies did he put out in the 1980s? Two. He would put out The Shining, and that's really, what was the other movie he put out in the 1980s? Full Metal Jacket. But in the 1970s, what did he put out? He just put out A Clockwork Orange, which is a masterpiece, and Barry Lyndon, which is also a masterpiece in the cinematography game. Not the best movie in my opinion, but he's another one where he could not miss. So if I was going to pick, I still think I'd pick Stanley Kubrick, because I love also his like 1960s movies that he did with Michael Douglas. You know, he couldn't miss, even right down to the year he died. The guy made another classic, but Eyes Wide Shut. So it's gonna be Stanley Kubrick, but I do love Sidney Lumet too. I mean, the guy put out Dog Day Afternoon, Network, 12 Angry Men, The Verdict. I mean, I know I'm missing a bunch because he was didn't he do The Wiz? He did The Wiz too. I mean, the guy was just amazing. Cootie's is a real fun time. I gotta check that one out. I know I've seen, that's another one where I know I've seen it with my cousin. I just haven't seen it a long time. John Doe Juggler. I collect vinyl and CD, but I've particularly look for movie soundtracks. Maybe I should dabble around a bit more. I think, there's some great movie scores out there, some movie soundtracks. I think as far as soundtracks go, it's funny. I think the Dumb and Dumber soundtrack is probably the best compilation, even the Batman Forever, as far as music goes, as far as music that I like. I think that those were something that's 94 and 95. But as far as music scores go, I don't think you can go wrong with any score done by Hans Zimmer or John Williams. Those are some of the best. The Batman score from Michael Giacchino that came out last year was one that I was playing the hell out of. And that score didn't get nominated for an Academy Award. I'm guessing just because it's a Batman movie. So God forbid we give that one an Academy Award. It didn't even make the short list. How? That was the best score of last year. But in the 1970s, we had plenty of great scores. In the 1980s, we started to get Sid scores. And again, I know people don't like them, but I love them. I'm always listening to the Terminator on Terminator score. And they actually released that, speaking of John Doe Juggler, of collecting vinyls, a really nice one that always gets promoted to me on Facebook. It's like this red blood, looks like the eye, it's blood red. It's amazing. I don't have it, but it looks incredible. Marvel Fan 2022 is I think Ash Williams is the most overrated horror protagonist of all time. I like him, but it's overrated. What's your favorite horror protagonist? So actually, speaking of Ash Williams, his arc is weird. I was listening to a podcast recently, and they were talking about like how his character changes. He's no, he's an innocent guy in the first one, then he kind of becomes an asshole as it progresses. Now I love him. I think he's one of the best. But one of my what's my favorite protagonists? I mean, I'm gonna probably have to say it's going to probably be Sigourney Weaver's character in the Alien movies. She's probably the greatest, and she gets three solid movies of her being the leader, of being a badass. So it's nice to see that. I think she was probably the best that we've ever gotten as far as, and on top of that, female protagonist, badass one. Like James Cameron loves that. But as far as horror movies, I would think the first Alien is, that's probably the most horror. Then we kind of get into action horror, which is weird that Terminator did the exact same thing. Tell him, Freddie said that Clockwork Orange is brilliant. Yes, it is. It's a masterpiece. That movie, it's one of the most uncomfortable movies you'll ever see. But I mean, from set design, every single aspect of that movie, and that's what you get Stanley Kubrick for. That's production design. Everything in that movie works. It's uncomfortable, yes, but it's just a phenomenal film. One that's going to leave you thinking. One at the end of the also that is a great 4K too. It's a lot the best looking because the film itself is supposed to look rough and gritty, but it's a phenomenal 4K. I have the steelbook for that. I love that movie. Uh, Alfred Hitchcock or Billy Wilder? Well, they are very different directors. 808 Physical Media. Billy Wilder. I just don't think that what's his name, Alfred Hitchcock, ever dabbled in comedy, whereas Billy Wilder has made some of the best comedies ever. But so I'm gonna have to take Alfred Hitchcock because Alfred Hitchcock is the king of the thrillers. A lot of people obviously will talk about his big movies, and my favorite of his is Vertigo, or Vertigo, then probably Psycho, but Birds. But another one of his best movies that I don't even think has been released in the 4K collections that they have, and that's Rope. The first time I ever saw Rope was on YouTube on a terrible quality, and that's when I would love a 4K for it. But that's not a 1970s movie. But Alfred Hitchcock is fantastic. And if you never saw Rope, check that one out. Or a Lifeboat. That's another one. Like these small contained stories that he did. Rope, though, was probably one of the first ones to ever make it look like it was a single shot. But you could see where they do the breaks because that's when they were starting to hide it behind things. But yeah, check out Rope if you haven't seen that. Marvel Fan 2022 wrote, today I was on a bus and a kid said to a stranger, oh, my boyfriend I go for a wee wee. I thought, what the fuck is the world coming to? I agree. The world is definitely falling apart. My favorite horror protagonist is Losers Club and Tommy Jarvis and Barclay. Well, yes, Tommy Jarvis is probably the only real protagonist we ever got. And in the same regard, I guess you could argue Nancy in the Nightmare on Elm Street movies from the 1980s. I was trying to think of 1970s like protagonists. Wouldn't you say that like Rosemary? Sorry about that, guys. The dogs. Actually, they've been good so far. Hold on a second. Leia, why don't you calm down? Sorry, guys. My dogs like to bark at anything. John Carpenter or Sam Raimi? Uh, that one's hard. John Carpenter. It's got to be John Carpenter because John Carpenter doesn't really have too many misses for me. Whereas Sam Raimi, you can argue, has had a few. I like Darkman, A Simple Plan. He's had some, the Spider-Man 3 is not one of my favorites. I'd say Sam Raimi has a little bit more misses than John Carpenter because even John Carpenter's misses, that's somebody whose scores I always listen to because John Carpenter loves the synthesizer. So for me, him and his scores, I love them. So even like in a bad movie like Ghosts of Mars, I would still say that the score is fantastic. Have you seen Dark Angel with Dolph Lundgren? It's an action slasher film. I've heard of Dark Angel, but I haven't seen it. That sounds like something that I would love. Robsta said, Rope is great. The Blu-ray is solid. I have to grab the Blu-ray. Yeah, I'm telling you, I've only seen it in some really low quality stuff, and I appreciated it because I think Rope is a fantastic movie. It's quick too, guys. If you haven't seen it, you're like in and out of it. Then Marvel Fan 22. I also really love Edgar Wright, and Abraham Lincoln is a horror protagonist. Abraham Lincoln in Abraham Lincoln Vampire Hunter. So funny story about that. When I started collecting Blu-rays, Abraham Lincoln Vampire Hunter. I'm not going to grab it because I'll have to go over there and look and leave you guys. But that was actually one of my first Blu-rays. I bought the Terminator collection, The Dark Knight, and I bought Abraham Lincoln Vampire Hunter because I was just intrigued by the title. I'm like, what the hell is this? It's a good movie. It really is. It's very underrated. Definitely check that one out. And yeah, Edgar Wright, he's one of the better modern directors. I did a list for him counting down his movies. I've only done lists for like Quentin Tarantino and him and David Fincher. I would love to one day do a list of like Spike Lee and Steven Spielberg's movies, and Martin Scorsese, but they have so many, and to count them down, it would be fun, but it would take a lot. Uh, John Doe Juggalo says, "So, what's the '70s movies that you would have loved to have a remake?" Ooh, that is a good question. What do I want them to remake from the 1970s? Because they've already remade Shaft twice. Jaws, I'm hoping they don't touch. They've remade Superman how many times? Um, since we were talking about the movie Hardcore, I would love to see what they could do with that in a remake. Like it, especially nowadays with how we accept people who work in that type of industry, working like, as far as women working and being strippers or working in porn and everything like that. I would love to see what they do in the modern world with a modern view of that. That could be interesting. Um, even Chinatown. I love Chinatown, but I think I could honestly get behind a remake of that, The French Connection, because what that movie is known for, it's car chase scenes. They could feel a little bit dated. Like that would be fun. That a remake of those kinds of movies. What other movies came out in the 1970s that I think would deserve a remake? I'm really big on like remaking movies that I didn't think were great. I don't like them when they touch the classics. I think that they should leave them alone, unless you're gonna do something like completely different and give it your own vision. Like, but remaking them like what they did with Psycho, like that's an abomination. Like, don't. Why would you do that? Why would you make a shot for shot remake? That makes no sense. Faith Williams, my wife, wrote, "Hi, babe. Hey, welcome to the chat. What time is it? I got to come get you soon." Oh yeah, 3:30. Damn. All right, I'll be off soon. Ridley Scott or Steven Spielberg? That's actually a lot easier for me. Steven Spielberg. I think Steven Spielberg is one of the greatest directors ever. He has, the guy has 3 years where he's put out two movies in the same years, which is incredible. He did that in 1993 with Schindler's List and Jurassic Park, 2002 with Catch Me If You Can and Minority Report, and he did it one more time with Munich and something else. Oh, and he did it recently with The Post and Ready Player One. So 4 years. So the guy, he almost can't miss, but he does have some misses. But before, he has 1941. That's considered, speaking of 1970s movies, that's considered one of his biggest failures, if not his biggest failure. So in the 1970s, he had Jaws, which can be argued as his greatest film, and he also had 1941, which can be argued is his worst film. And 1941 is brutal. And it's funny. I watched a documentary with him, and he's like, I consider myself a funny guy. And he's got some jokes, but straightforward comedy just might not be his thing. So I'm gonna go Steven Spielberg because Ridley Scott. I like Ridley Scott's movies. I reviewed Thelma and Louise this week. I think Ridley Scott has some of the best movies, but Ridley Scott has a lot of misses. I actually think that his brother Tony Scott is more consistent. I love Tony Scott movies. They are another kind of genre. Like we're talking about how much I love 1980s movies. I mean, Tony Scott he made Beverly Hills Cop, Top Gun in the 1980s. He made Days of Thunder. I mean, I love his movies. Tony Scott is just fantastic. uh let's see. Tell them Fred thoughts on ever getting 7 on 4K. So I saw recently that we were gonna get that on 4K. It turns out it was a fake steelbook. I don't know why. That's another one that would translate great to 4K. David Fincher is another one of those directors where we don't really have any of his movies on 4K. The only 4K for David Fincher is The Social Network, and you can only get that in the Columbia Classics Part 2 collection, which I'm pretty sure is out of print. So that's pretty disappointing. I don't know why we haven't gotten any more of his movies on 4K. This guy was starred out in music videos. I mean, he makes his movies look beautiful. He makes like Seven. The big part of Seven is the world that they created. That city is gorgeous. It would the rain that would translate beautifully to 4K. How we haven't gotten it yet kills me. I would love Seven on 4K. It's one of my favorite movies. I'm doing a podcast. My favorite movies from each year. Stole that from both Jeff from Films at Home and The Incredible Tony, because they did that, and I'm going to do that too. In 1995, my favorite movie from that year is Seven. So I would love that. I feel the same way about remakes. They should remake baddish movies, not classic. Yeah, it feels like people want to put their spin on their favorite movies, but we already have those movies. Why like do your own thing. Like make a movie. Like if a movie failed, but you like the premise of it, let's reuse that premise and make a different movie out of it. Let's do something like you saw like the okay, like there was something in there. I can do something with that. Like if a movie fails, at least that, but the premise is good. At least we can get something out of that. I don't think we need to be remaking classics. They're classics for a reason. Don't touch them. But if a movie didn't do good or like the technology has caught up to where you think you can get a better film out of that, I understand that too. Sometimes if you made a movie back in the 1960s and you're like, oh, it's such a good idea, but like they just didn't have the tech yet. That's perfect. Remake a movie with that. Like, I mean, Steven, Unforgiven, the script was around since the 1970s, but Clint Eastwood had to age into the role before he decided to finally make it. Jason Momoa or Dwayne Johnson? Oh my god, that's actually really hard because I would have said Dwayne Johnson until I saw Fast X. Once I saw Fast X, I think I might be on the Jason Momoa train. Jason Momoa stole that movie. Apparently, I read this week that Vin Diesel wasn't happy about that either, that he stole that movie, that he was overacting that entire time. So I would probably still pick The Rock though, because he has had. I mean, I grew up with WWF Rock. Rock the actor is not great. He doesn't have too many movies I love. So I'm gonna take Jason Momoa. Even as much as I love The Rock, I mean, he's the people's champ. I'm gonna take Jason Momoa just for what he's done. Do you like The Lost Boys, The Abraham Lincoln Vampire Hunter, or do you like 30 Days a Night and Day Shift? So I like The Lost Boys is fantastic. That's one of the best horror movies from the 1980s. I love that movie. Great 4K that came out last year from that. Abraham Lincoln Vampire Hunter is also fantastic. I love that movie. 30 Days of Night. I do like 30 Days of Night and Day Shift. I think I've seen Day Shift. I'm pretty sure I've seen Day Shift. So I'm not too 100% unsure of that. But 30 Days of Night is fantastic. Out of all those movies, though, Lost Boys is the best. Lost Boys is a classic. I just actually rewatched Flatliners again last week, which not the same, but kind of similar cast, and you can still get the same director, Joel Schumacher, our old Batman friend. What do you think of Shia LaBeouf being a big star? What your favorite movie of his? My favorite of his is Disturbia. I love the action at the end. I actually do not love Disturbia, but I do think that Shia LaBeouf should have been a bigger movie star. The biggest problem with Shia LaBeouf is he got in his own way, but that's what happens with those child stars. He had Even Stevens, and then he had Hulse, which I think is a fantastic movie. I will never forget. That's one of those movie memories I have. I remember seeing that on a bus on my way to medieval times on a school field trip. I saw Hulse for the first time, and I thought that movie was great. Then he was in the Transformers movies. I was in that movie Eagle Eye. I saw that in theaters. That was pretty decent. And yeah, with Disturbia, everyone thought this guy was going to be huge, and then he just kind of got in his own way, unfortunately. But then once eventually we got into like the Transformers, that was all he did. Then Woody kind of fell off the map for a while. And then Honey Boy that came out a couple of years ago, I thought he was great. I thought we were going to get a resurgence from him. We're not going to talk about what he did in Kingdom of the Crystal Skull because I hate that movie, but I'm going to rewatch that again. Al Pacino or Robert De Niro? This is $1 million question. I'm going to have to go with I'm going with De Niro. As much as I love Al Pacino too, because they're very similar and they came up in the exact same time. They're still working out. Oh, no, De Niro just had a kid at 79. Apparently Al Pacino's having a kid at 83. So they're still making babies and they're still making movies. So good for him. But I'm going to go with De Niro. De Niro definitely has made some of my favorite movies. I mean, just between the stuff he did with Martin Scorsese, Mean Streets, Taxi Driver, those are all classics. Raging Bull's probably his best performance, even if it's not my favorite movies, but Jimmy Conway and Goodfellas, Casino as Ace Rothstein. I mean, and then you get his comedy stuff. Like I just saw him last week in About My Father. He still can do it if he wants to. He's got Kills of the Flower Moon coming out later this year. He was still good in The Irishman, even if he shouldn't be kicking people because he does look old now, which is what happens to the best of us. Good for him. He's lived a full life. Good example was War of the Worlds. Great movie made too early, and the remake was solid. 100%. That's 100. That's probably the ultimate example, actually. John Doe Juggalo. Yeah, that came out at a time 1950s sci-fi, 1950 sci-fi. It all looked cheap back then. They did the best they could. It was the 1950s, but that was very popular time for the sci-fi genre. Just want to let you guys know I'm going to get off in about 10 minutes. So if you have any last questions you want to throw in there, make sure you throw them in now because I don't want to leave here without skipping anyone. I'd feel like shit about myself if I did. So as far as that goes, but anyway, yeah, that's a big one. That's one that definitely deserved the remake. And if you go back and look at a bunch of 1950s, we had that Keanu Reeves one that came out probably like 15 years ago now. The Man Who Fell to Earth, I think it was. That movie, like that had a remake, but it wasn't good. But yeah, remaking some sci-fi, or like, we have, how many of the Universal monster movies have been remade? And I think the big reason is because of the technology back then. But the problem is, when you remake a lot of those Universal monsters remakes, you're kind of missing the point. The Invisible Man worked, but you're not understanding like the tone and atmosphere that they've captured by like movies like Frankenstein or Bride of Frankenstein. The world they created was so atmospheric. That's why when you get to the 1970s and you get Young Frankenstein, they reuse those same Universal Monsters sets, is because that was a big part of it. So certain things it works, but for the most part, it could be hit or miss. Do you think Elijah Wood, Shia LaBeouf, and Finn Wolfhard is an action star? Finn Wolfhard, I cannot see being an action star. I mean, he's still young. I think he just turned 18, so it's very possible that you know he can develop into an action star. Right now, he just looks like a tall, skinny kid, but I would love to see him do it. I think the guy is a great actor. I think he'll probably be the one that becomes the biggest actor. If I had to guess out of that show, I think he'll end up being the biggest star. He's been popping up in a bunch of stuff, like Ghostbusters, Afterlife. So he can definitely do it. If you put some muscle on, I'm sure he can become an action star. We just saw that with the guy from Guardians of the Galaxy 3, who was in what's his name? Will Pat something. I can't remember. Will Polar or something like that. He jacked up and he looks great. Clint Eastwood or Gene Hackman? That's a tough one. Oh man. I'm gonna pick Gene Hackman. I love Gene Hackman. Everything he's in, he's usually good. Clint Eastwood, he has a lot of misses, but Clint Eastwood has also directed some of my favorite movies ever, like Unforgiven. He has some of my favorite performances ever. That's a really hard question. I don't know how you pick that. That's like a number one versus a number two seed, where the matchup is just so unfair. Like they're both great, but you got to remember that Clint Eastwood made Any Which Way with Loose, and I do not like that movie. But he's also directed so many great movies. He's made so many great movies. He still can direct. I mean, he made that Richard Jewell movie a couple of years ago. I thought was really good. Sean Connery or Daniel Craig? I'm gonna have to pick Sean Connery because Daniel Craig, away from the Bond franchise, he's getting into his groove a little bit now with the Knives Out movies. But before that, he was in Road to Perdition. He was really good. He had that one movie. What was it? Oh my god, it was a British movie. I can't think of the name, but he was great in it. And yeah, I think he did narration in it too, but you can't remember. But before that, he was fantastic. Uh, so yeah, I'm gonna have to take Connery just because Sean Connery made, besides the Bond movie, Sean Connery was in and he's Henry Jones Sr. He's made so many classic films, The Untouchables, The Rock. He was firing on all cylinders as he got older. So Sean Connery is gonna have to be my guy. Thoughts on Suspiria? Suspiria is fantastic. It's very atmospheric. I think that as far as Giallo films go, that's probably one of the best. That movie is it's a classic. I love the colors. The plot of the movie, it's take it or leave it. I think it's definitely more about the atmosphere when you watch Suspiria. But I do enjoy that. I haven't seen the remake yet. I'm kind of nervous to rewatch that. To watch that, I heard it's good. It's on Amazon because they made it, but I'm a little bit nervous to watch that because I do like the original. That's a 4K I've heard is phenomenal that I still, to this day, I don't know why I haven't picked it up. I have Phenomenon 4K, but yet I don't have that. So go figure. I haven't seen Eagle Eye, but I know Shia LaBeouf is in and out and is directed by the director of Disturbia. Yeah, I actually really liked Eagle Eye. If you haven't seen that, I would definitely check that one out. Hackman over Clint. So see, what's it called? Robust degrees with me. I appreciate that. And let's see, Marvel Fan 2022. I think The Lighthouse is overrated. I actually really love The Lighthouse. I've seen that a bunch of times. I got the Blu-ray from A24. I really enjoy that movie, but I understand that movie. That's the definition of a movie that's not for everyone. But Robert Edgers, you know, I felt like that. I felt disappointed by The Northman after I saw that last year. I was so excited because I love The Witch and I love The Lighthouse. Then I walked out of The Northman and I was kind of disappointed. I bought the 4K, I watched it again, and I'm still like, it doesn't hit the high. Like I think The Lighthouse is my favorite of his movies, even over The Witch, but I still I'm always gonna go see his movies on day one. I think he's making Nosferatu. He kind of reminds me, him and Ari Aster. They kind of came up in that same way. Like Ari Aster had Hereditary, and then I didn't really like Midsommar as much as other people did. And then I still haven't seen Beau's Afraid. I'm gonna probably here's coming to streaming this month, so I'll check that out. But like they're kind of jockeying for position, I feel like, in the horror genre right now, and like, but also like in the art house genre. So I'm enjoying both of their works. They're just both kind of feel like they're putting a movie out, and like, but then their first movies, like The Witch and Hereditary, I still think might be their best, but The Lighthouse, I think, might be better than all those movies. So it's tough. It really comes down to personal choice, I think, on those kinds of movies. But I understand why you would think that's overrated. But anyway, guys, that's gonna do it for me here. We'll be doing this again next Saturday. We'll schedule it for the same time at 2:30. So if you guys actually want to give me some suggestions, you can always do that in the comments for this video, and we'll talk about what we're gonna do next week. John Doe Juggalo sent me something before. I don't have another question, but I did want to thank you for spending your Saturday afternoon with us. I hope you continue to have a great weekend. You too, John Doe Juggalo. I really appreciate that so much. You saying that. Uh, and everyone else in here, have a good weekend. Thank you so much for being here with me, guys. I really appreciate it. This is the best. I love talking movies with you guys. Really appreciate it so much. Let's do this again next week. I'll be seeing you guys around. Over and out.